Okay, guys and gals, Buongiorno is back. Picking back up where we left off with the usual technical difficulties, life difficulties. And to be honest with you, it's like I woke up this morning like feeling like crap, but I'm feeling better now, so I don't think I'm dying. Some sinus, whatever, but just kind of feeling like I'm walking through concrete, but we need to like re-engage, and I want to get back into unpacking the Matrix. Hopefully we'll wrap it up in this lecture, and at the top I want to talk a little bit about bullet points, things to be thinking about in the week or two ahead. After the Matrix, I've sent you guys out a PDF. It is the introduction to a book that we're not going to read. We're not going to read it, but it's called It's called Seeing is Believing. All right, and there's a lot of confusion here at this point because we read two different texts that are both by guys named Berger. Okay, the one is Arthur Berger. He's still, it's like, and then John Berger does Ways of Seeing. So there gets to be some semantic confusion, but we'll figure it out. Arthur, who wrote Seeing is Believing, by the way, we had a guest chat with last semester. Not about this book, but the book we were reading. We were reading the textbook that he had written for our mass media research course. Arthur is retired now. He lives in San Francisco, and he was great. He was great. He had a lot to say. He had a lot of funny anecdotes. And if you want to see that talk that we had with Arthur, I'll send you out the link. It's on the blog from last semester. And, you know, I'm a big stickler. I'm a big proponent of bringing in guest speakers. It's like I was saying in the Collaborate chat. You know, I haven't lined up the guest speakers entirely for this semester yet. A lot of balls up in the air, but in the past we've had people that authors and well-known people and podcasters, and we've had famous people like actually show up in class in a brick and mortar setting. You know, it's like that's how I roll. That's how I roll, my friends. It's like, you know, so there's that. But I'm only reading. So I sent the PDF out of the introduction of the Arthur Berger book, Ways of Seeing, because I think it's a really good overview. The rest of the book is good too. I wouldn't dissuade you from looking into that book, but it really goes kind of afield from where we want to really be, where we really want to be concentrating in COVID-ridden, you know, society is going out of control, 2020, you know, and I want to stay with like stuff that is boom, 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 stuff that you can use, you know, today. But the introduction, for those of you who have read it, is a really good overview on the different dimensions of perception, seeing images, what the implications are of images, how we see things, how we make meaning. And in that sense, it's a really good general overview. And it puts together a kind of conceptual framework that we can operate out of. So the next lecture, I'm going to do one more video lecture, and that's going to be on the introduction of Berger, going over that, and kind of hitting what he has to say in that. You know, right after that, we are going to get into the John Berger book, Ways of Seeing, which is up here somewhere, Ways of Seeing. That book, once again, as far as like buying text, that book is available in the bookstore. If you want to hazard the campus bookstore, if you want to get a biocontainment suit on and go over there and go get the book, you may do that. It's not that expensive either. It's like $7-8. But having said that, the book is a bit. I'm going to be putting up links on Blackboard and as emails for you to read the whole book online for free, if you choose to do so. Under these financially constricting days that we're having, it's like I try to make everything as like cost effective as I can. If they would make things a little more remunerative for me on their end, Agent Smith and the powers that be that work in that make decisions about what people get paid, I would have a lot more latitude with this. But I know how it goes. I'm feeling the pinch myself. I know very well, and we need to talk. We'll start talking more and more about that. In the next couple days, I am going to post an episode of On Contact with Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges is somebody that I would consider one of our seminal social, political, economic critics of our age. And he's somebody that, not unlike Morpheus, has a tendency to want to reveal the truth about things that are going on. Chris was a journalist at the New York Times. I would love to get him for the class. Would love to. And actually have a contact that knows him. But it's just, we may get him at some point. Needless to say, Chris is like a very, very famous guy who is... We read his book last semester in Mass Media Research, his recent book, ominously and presciently named America the Farewell Tour. He is a very, very staunch social and political critic who has a tendency to speak the truth about what's going on. And he had this conversation on Contact with Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff, the famous economist, who is another one of these guys that I have a tendency to go to when I want to hear what's really going on. What's really going on with the economy, what's really going on, in terms of certain social issues that are going on, and what may or may not be coming down the road. And these two in conversation, it runs 28 minutes. It is kind of a red pill of its sort. As far as like making predictions about what may or may not be happening, what we're in right now, the problems that this faces, and really blows the whistle on a lot of the denial that's going on, all right, about the economy, about the pandemic, about what our prospects are of getting through this, and what we need to do, what we should be doing, or what we should be mobilizing. So I'm going to post that episode on the blog as extra credit. I think that it is in your interest to watch it. It is in your interest to take notes. And it's definitely in our interest to engage in a dialogue via the comment thread on that episode of On Contact. We should definitely do that, because it kind of links to everything else that we're going to talk about in this class, and also in Intro to Mass Media this semester. So there's that. So be looking for that. I'll send out an email when I get it up. But in the meantime, we will be getting into John Berger's Ways of Seeing probably by next week. Remember also, with the John Berger book, there was a 4-episode series, 4 half-hour episodes of Ways of Seeing. That it was a very it was on the BBC years ago. All right, this book goes back a while, but it still has a lot to say to us. But it was a very surprisingly successful miniseries that came on British television about about the development of art and photography, and wanted to draw attention to a lot of the implications of art, how it was shaped and how it kind of shaped modern life, and how a lot of the motifs of classical art kind of follow through into photography. And he has a lot of really sobering things to say about the way it shaped our culture, the way it shaped, for instance, the relationship between men and women, the way that it produced a kind of consumer mentality. There's a lot of stuff going on in that, and it's going to take at least 3 or 4 weeks to unpack everything, all the implications of what John Berger has to say in ways of seeing, but that's for another day, my friends. And we're going to get back into the Matrix here. Going to pick up where we left off. And sorry about the video. And getting it out a little bit late due to the fact that YouTube, more often than not, I've been doing these since last semester, and more often than not, I don't want to belabor this because we don't have a lot of time. But it decided that it didn't like the fact that I was using clips from the Matrix. Warner Brothers is like the Tower of Mordor, and it decided to trim them out. There's this whole app that they use to trim it out. I thought I could get by it. I usually do. And I didn't have time to dispute it because it could have been, I could have disputed it in terms of fair use. It was being used for educational purposes, and they would have probably, probably complied. They would have probably gave in. But we just didn't have. I just didn't have time. So what I did on the blog was I put the time code where those scenes that I'm referring to appear in the Matrix. The meeting with between Neo and Trinity, and then the first meeting between Morpheus and Neo. And what was said, and we kind of unpacked that. So we kind of left it, in terms of the narrative, we kind of left it at a place wherein Neo was basically pulled out of the Matrix, and realized that his life up until that point had been basically an illusion, perpetrated by this mechanism that had taken over of sentient robots, and then they start to rebuild him, because at that point, and I think what the Wachowskis are trying to say with Neo at that point is that if Neo is our everyman, when we start to wake up and we start to see, and we wake up from our sense of unawareness and docility, and not knowing more about what's going on out there. At first, we're initially resistant. We don't want to hear it, and we're weak. Because I think what the Wachowskis are saying is that as a society, we get beaten we get beaten down so bad that we are in a state of just being kind of anemic and not having our strength, and with knowledge comes strength and resolve, and it starts to be about making decisions. I think that once Morpheus starts making these revelations to Neo, and we're going to see another one. I'm going to try to get by YouTube Agent. By the way, YouTube is controlled by Agent Smith. It is not it, and his group, and they're trying to constantly mess with my shows and mess with my stuff. But I'm going to try to get by them today by just showing one off the screen. It seems like we'll see how it works. We'll see if they catch it. But I want to at least look at the scene where Morpheus and Neo start to have this conversation about what happened. All right, how what had happened in the world that this situation had arisen. All right, so let's watch. Let's see if we can't watch that. The speakers on my computer aren't great, but we should be good.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the desert of the real. We have only bits and pieces of information, but what we know for certain is that at some point in the early 21st century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI. AI? You mean artificial intelligence? A singular consciousness that spawned an entire race of machines. We don't know who struck first, us or them, but we know that it was us that scorched the sky. At the time, they were dependent on solar power, and it was believed that they would be unable to survive without an energy source as abundant as the sun. Throughout human history, we have been dependent on machines to survive. Fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony. The human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat. Combined with a form of fusion, the machines had found all the energy they would ever need. There are fields, endless fields, where human beings are no longer born. We are grown. For the longest time, I wouldn't believe it. And then I saw the fields with my own eyes. Watched them liquefy the dead so they could be fed intravenously to the living. And standing there, facing the pure, horrifying precision, I came to realize the obviousness of the truth. What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
No. I don't believe it. It's impossible.
I did
didn't say it would be easy to you. I just said it would be the truth.
Stop. Let me out! Let me out! I want out!
So there's that. Within the scene, we get more of a sense of the narrative and the reveal. You know, we start to realize that Morpheus gives us more exposition about like what happened and what's really going on. Not in like a mystery, you know, but you know, in this situation, the truth. And it's like Morpheus gives him the disclaimer, you know, beforehand. Like, you know, all I'm going to offer you is the truth. Nothing more. And the truth in this particular instance is horrifying. You know, that, you know, he has to wake up to the situation. One of the most important lines, I believe, though, is this whole idea that what is the Matrix, right? What is the Matrix? The Matrix is control. It is a system of control. And it is a system of illusion. But not only that, on top of all of it, there's this horrifying revelation that everybody, all human beings are basically being used as an energy source for these sentient sentinels and agents, you know. So there's that. There's this whole idea, and that's not an uncommon motif in science fiction. And I can remember, if you ever get a chance, one of the most horrifying, one of the creepiest episodes of the original Twilight Zone is called How to Serve Man. How to Serve Man, original Twilight Zone. It had Ted Cassidy in it. This race of extraterrestrials lands on Earth, and they come supposedly in peace, and they bring all these miraculous technologies, and you know, they make all these promises about how they're going to save humanity from starvation and poverty, and they'll never have to, you know, all this stuff that they're offering a promise about. And one of the scientists gets a hold of their book, this operator's manual, and he's like a linguist or something. And he starts to decode the book, and during the course of the episode, he's like, "Well, I found out what the title is. At least it's called How to Serve Man, right?" And during the and then the aliens make this overture to people. They're like, "We would like to take a bunch of you back to our planet so that we can have this like exchange, this ambassadorial exchange. You can see all these wonderful things." So all these saucers land. The people start getting on them and getting on these escalators, and the episode ends with the linguist, the scientist, running to the escalator where all these people are getting on, and he's just like, "Get off the escalators, get off. I finally realized what the book is." And they were like, "What are you talking about? You know, we're going to the..." He's like, "No, How to Serve Man. I figured out what the manual really is." And then the final words are, "It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook." And, because they're going to eat them. It's like, so it's kind of like that, you know, it's like kind of like this horrifying reveal. But I think that, you know, what's going on is that it operates on a lot of different levels, right? It's certainly, The Matrix is not the first film in this genre to point to and warn us about the runaway nature of technology, and how, you know, and this is a common motif in so much sci-fi, but, you know, the whole idea of robotics and AI, and how, you know, the best laid plans of man to automate, and we can see this in our own life, and it's like, I think that it's a very pithy commentary about the things that are going on everywhere from the internet to VR to all these things, the ways in which, and algorithms, and the way that the economy is starting to kind of just do itself. All these things are different instances of things that we had control over, or supposedly have control over, that develop a mind of their own, and are not human, and don't necessarily have any kind of regard for us, up to the possible, and many people have speculated on this, and Agent Smith will do this monologue later on that, what will be the relationship, if we actually went as far. I think there's a lot of theoretical problems with all this. There's a lot of, very, very well-known four-dimensional eggheads that, believe that, machine consciousness is possible, and machine intelligence will lead to machine consciousness. But we need to make distinctions about what constitutes intelligence, what constitutes consciousness. But all of this is, all these films, including The Matrix and iRobot and other film AI, there's even a film AI, where there are always like these cautionary tales about what these sentient machines will do once they have the power, and in The Matrix, the scenario is one in which there is a war that goes on where they basically get the upper hand, and Morpheus gives us, the reveal on all that, this battle that has been going on, and I think that, this whole idea of bringing out a Duracell battery and saying they're using us, I think that, that whole setup of being, of one's resources being surreptitiously used by powers outside of our control definitely speaks to everything that's going on with data mining, surveillance, the way in which the corporate state, the technocratic corporate state is monetizing everything that we do, turning it's like, I don't have to tell you that, we've certainly, moved in our economic evolution from a products-based and manufacturing and items-based and consumer technology to one where the economy consists primarily of data and buying and selling data, and this is where, all of these current antitrust moves against things like Google, and Facebook and Amazon, it's like, they want to break up the monopolies because, it's like the old adage goes, fat folks. It's like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we're seeing more and more of this. And we could do classes and classes and classes on the ways in which, the social media and app technostructure is basically getting free labor out of us. And it kind of started with gaming, but the way that, things are being monetized. And so there's this whole idea there's this whole play on the idea that the reality is that, yeah, we are being harvested in a certain way by powers unbeknownst to us. While at the same time, it seems as if, the shift, the vast chasm of iniquity between the haves and have-nots is becoming so debilitating for civilization that it's going to be interesting to see how we take back the power, how we take back the power. So in that sense, I think the Matrix is very prescient. And I think there's two other main themes that we really need to stress with this scene. One I think has to do with the fact that Morpheus gives Neo a piece of history. He tells him the history. He tells him how this happened, all right? A history that had been hidden. A history that anybody in most of humanity at that point, being encased in these pods, didn't know anything about. And I think the Wachowskis are attempting to say something that is exceedingly pertinent, and it has to do with the idea that history, we have to understand, if we want to get out of a situation, whether it be as a nation, whether it be as a society, or whether it be at the level of individuals, your own individual life. If you find yourself in a challenging or catastrophic situation, the first thing that one needs to know is, how did you get there? How did we get there? How have we gotten here as a nation? How have we gotten here as a civilization? And that knowledge, is not pretty, more often than not, and we can see when Neo reels back in horror that it's like everything that Morpheus has just told him, he can't handle. He just can't handle it. And there is this instinct in us to not want to know the hard truths, But once again, it's like, I think that in our own lives and in our own situation, we need to know, it's like, unless we know how we got into a situation, with the knowledge of how we got into a situation comes the tools for possibly undoing it. We need to have history. We need to understand our history, and we need to have as real a semblance of that history as we can. And hence, what's going on in society today is really about waking up to certain historic factors. For instance, the whole race question, and the whole fight for civil rights, and going back and recognizing how did this come about? How is it that over 150 years after the emancipation and the abolishment of slavery, that African Americans in this country are still, statistically, in such a precarious and life-threatening situation, and I think that we as a society are going back and trying to figure that out now, how this continued, how these things continued to play themselves out, and also, in terms of the economy, we have to understand, how this all got set up, and we're going to get a lot more of that in this class, So what does Morpheus show Neo? What Morpheus shows Neo is basically a devastated world. A world that has been devastated, ecologically devastated. He shows him the real world, and here I get into this whole, we need to know how things got this way. We need to know our history in order to do anything. It might not be pretty, but at least it's the truth. Then you can do something about it. It's kind of like in AA or 12-step methodology. It's step one. It's recognizing the situation that you're powerless and there's nothing you can do. It's not pretty, but at least from that beginning, once somebody admits that something has gone really, really wrong and stops candy coating it and stops sugar coating it and stops hiding from it and finding ways of being distracted from it and decides to recognize it for what it is and start to do something about it, nothing happens. It's until you can rearrange the furniture as much as you want. All right, You can get into all kinds of like policy. You can get into legislation. You know, you can hope, you can pin your hopes on the ballot box. You know, but with all the things that we're looking at this point, I would submit that we need to dig deeper. We need to dig a lot deeper, and we need to get a lot more real about what is going on. All right, and should one be afraid? There's a healthy fear, but should we mobilize? Yeah, absolutely. It's that or whatever. You know, it's this whole idea of the house burning down and being worried about what color. You know, it's like, as far as I'm concerned, and this is just Buongiorno running at the mouth. You know, regardless of what happens with the elections in November, it's like the house is burning, and being concerned about what figurehead you are going to place up there in the Oval Office is kind of like being concerned about what color drapes you're hanging in your living room when the house is burning down. You know, the house is burning down, my folks, my friends. You know, we need to, like, you know, do something like quickly with this. So with this whole idea of a devastated world, you know, it's like, I think that, you know, in a way that is somewhat bone chilling. I think what the Wachowskis are trying to say there is that remember what I said about sci-fi, science fiction never being about some far off place, some far off time. It's always about the here and now. And I think what the Wachowskis are trying to say, even as early as 1999, is basically that the real world that we are living in has been devastated. That we are living in devastation, you know, and that things have been devastated. Think about it, my friends. Think about the ecological situation that we are in right now. For anybody that is listening to scientists, think about the environmental situation as it stands right now. Look at the wildfires that have gone above and beyond anything that we have ever seen in California right now and in Oregon. Look at the rapid shifts, you know, that are going on. You know, that the world is becoming devastated. The truth is devastated. It's like it's a mythical beast trying to get anybody in power to get honest with telling the truth. You know, nature is devastated. You know, nature is very resilient, but nature is becoming more and more devastated. We are devastated. We are devastated, and not just because of the pandemic. We've been beaten down. You know, we've been shuffled off. We've been ripped off. You know, we're barely hanging on. Most people at this point, you know, with 28 million unemployments, with millions of people becoming home, we're talking millions. You know, we're not talking a small amount of people. We're talking about millions of people within the next couple months being homeless. You know, and these are and the Wachowskis, and this has been going on for a while. And if you look at that On Contact episode that I'm going to put on, that's going to put it, what Richard Wolff has to say about how everything has sped up, you know, is very, very sobering. So that there was a sense that we ourselves have been devastated already in many different ways, and we need to recognize that, all right? We are being harvested. Our energy is being harvested. Our lives are being harvested as raw material for a ruling order. A handful of puppeteers, my friends, with all the money pulling the strings. Our days and hours are spent acquiring the bare minimum for survival just to get by. You know, working multiple jobs to pay tuition, to pay the rent, to pay the utilities. You know, and a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and we're all kind of in the same boat. if that, and the technological diversions that have become multiform, that keep us distracted and quiescent, all of the gadgets, all of the apps, all of the digital bells and whistles, all of it around us as like a fish in water. Remember, we're in this envelope that the Matrix is a metaphor for, of distraction. And think about the Republican and Democratic National Committee, how science fictional it all is. How absolutely, like, anybody with the least amount, anybody that even has like a teeny weeny tiny like budget sized bullshit filter is saying, wait a minute, it's like, this is like ridiculous, it's like, so there's that. And this has been a staple, but the thing is that although everything has been kind of sped up in this game, nothing has essentially really changed that much. This has been going on now, and Richard Wolff will say it in the video that I put up on the blog. This has been going on now for like 40 or 50 years, folks, and at least until the mid-70s. At least since the mid-70s, right? And this has become a staple of industrial capitalism since its very beginnings, And we'll talk more about that. How the whole system is predicated on exploitation of the majority in favor of the minority. It's part of the system, folks. All right? And what the Matrix is talking about is a metaphor for the system. A metaphor for the system that keeps us in shackles, that continues to exploit our minds, our bodies, our resources, and gives us gadgets as some kind of like as a consolation, like some kind of consolation. People since the very beginning of industrial capitalism have been worked to death. We're being worked to death until they are no longer useful to the system. When the system doesn't need you anymore, all right? When everything gets automated to the point where Amazon or Google only need like 100 people instead of 10,000, right? Where it's all kind of done. Where does that put the mass of people? Where is that going to put the mass of people? People being worked, it's like when you are what we are seeing, my friends, and this is the red pill, and it saddens me to have to say it. But what we are seeing is a whole generation ultimately becoming disposable. Ultimately not having any jobs waiting, irregardless of the pandemic. Not having any jobs waiting for them, or certainly not the jobs and this continued exploitation, and I think the correct response is to be somewhat fearful of the future. However, I think the Matrix is a testament to this idea of the resourcefulness of the human spirit. How we collectively can get together and against all odds, get the upper hand once again. Once we get the knowledge that we need, how do we get the knowledge? Through education, and when education when education falls apart, then a lot of other things start to fall apart too. And all of the budget cuts that are going on right now. And I'm sure some of you have heard how New York State decided to cut TAP, and they're cutting 20% of the budget. Where's all the money going? Where's the money going? We're gonna find out in that Giraud book, all right, about how this system is operating, how profit-driven education is operating, how public funding is being cut, and what that has to say, what that says to you and your position in it, and what we need to do about it. what we need to do about it, and it has to happen soon. But people who are no longer useful to the system, what happens to them? What happens to the surplus? There's places for the surplus so that they can keep generating capital, right? One of the places where the surplus, the unemployed, and the unemployable can go, where they keep generating capital, is where, my friends? Into the prisons. And we have more people in prison in this country per capita than any other country in the world, because the prison system is an industry. And the more beds that are filled, the more money goes into people's hands. So Henry Giroux in his book will start referring to this whole prison pipeline. All right, that if you're of no use to society, you go to prison. This is not a new idea. Back in the 18th century, if you got too far in debt, there were these places that you would go called debtors' prisons. They would put you in prison for being in debt. What about the disabled folks? What about the mentally disabled? What about the physically disabled? What about the elderly? All right, how they become disposable. All right, how they become a surplus, and how the system creates a structure to continue to extract profit from that, in terms of the mental health industry, in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, in terms of the retirement community industry, that is, let's face it, at the point of criminality, all right, when your grandparents, in order to have any quality of life, have got to forfeit their houses, and all of the equity from the house in order to have any lingering quality of life. That is called exploitation, my friends. And we need to talk about it. Sorry, there's not a lot of jokes. I got no jokes here. There's no jokes, and we're fucked. But is there hope? Yeah, I think so, and we'll talk more about the hope. But the sick part of it is that the workforce considers themselves the lucky ones because there is a growing demographic of the unemployed. And what's going on right now with, for instance, the lack of jobs, right? The lack of jobs is creating a situation where employers can fire at will. Because there's so many people out there waiting to get jobs that they can lengthen your hours, they can worsen the conditions of your employment because you're disposable. There's enough. It's like, if I can't find, it's like, well, if you ain't going to work out, and if you're not going to show up here, and you're not going to shovel this thing out, I'll find somebody that will, and that's not like a really good position to be in. That's not a good position to be in. And we'll talk more about this, right? So this is just a slide that I did, just kind of like pointing to some of the phenomena that the Matrix kind of acts as an allegory for. Being the different allegories for being asleep, being tethered to the virtual world constantly, as a distraction, growing ecological crisis and industrial contamination all around us, everything from like the fracking industry, poverty, the growing poverty out there that is growing as we speak, and the pushback, the militarized pushback to contain it, to contain and create some kind of stability, usually comes with an iron fist. Because it usually comes from it usually comes from a system that deploys these forces of state violence, let's call it what it is, that is trying to contain its own people. You know, and has basically been enlisted to control and deal a blow to its own people. All right? And that will tie in a lot with, and here's just another slide about that. The Matrix, let's talk a little bit about the Matrix as a metaphor for control. You know, this whole idea of surveillance society. You know, how everything is watched, how everything is recorded. You know, how, the military-industrial law enforcement complex is utilized to shut down any kind of dissent or any kind of truth. You know, this is a picture of a turn of the century prison system. It was called the whole layout of penal of prisons used to be set up in a way in which there would be like a central guard tower and then all the cells in a circle, and the whole idea was created by the social philosopher by the name of Jeremy Bentham. It was called the panopticon system, where the whole thing psychologically works like this. It's like there's a central guard tower, and around the guard tower are all the cells with their doors exposed and the walkways exposed. And the way that the guard tower operates is like this, that irregardless of whether there were guards looking at you or not, there was always, it's like surveillance cameras, right? It's like there's always, whether someone's looking or not, there was always, it becomes a form of behavior modification due to the fact that you live in the fear that someone is watching. And it changes your behavior. You know, it's a cooling mechanism of free speech, because people don't want to speak out because they think they're being heard, and all that. And we'll talk more. We'll talk more about that with another scene that's coming up where Morpheus starts to train Neo. All right, because on top of everything else, you know, so Neo is already at a point where he's just like, I can't handle this, right? I can't handle what you're trying to tell me. He wants to escape, like anybody would, when the truth has been revealed. But on top of that, he also has the added burden of being told by Morpheus what? Like, you're the guy that's got to save it. You know, it's like we think that it's like there was a prophecy, you know, and once again, it like plays on this whole idea of messianic themes, where there was a prophet, there was somebody that existed prior that said that he would come again. So there's all this kind of Christ imagery about Neo being the one that was predicted that would save them from Agent Smith and the machines and free everybody. He would be like the liberator. Now he's got to deal with that too. Now Neo's got to deal with that revelation too. Not only has he, so it's like Morpheus is saying, Neo, not only is the world become a shit show, like no one has ever seen, but you are the one that's got to fix it. You know, and it's like, he's just like, whoa, dude. It's like, you know, he kind of goes back to his, like, you know, remember him and Bill, and remember Keanu and Bill and Ted. He's kind of like, if Keanu was like the Bill character from Bill and Ted, he'd be like, whoa, dude, it's just like too much, man. I can't handle it. You know, I just can't handle it. But then starts what happens? Then starts the training. The training within the training simulators. And the movie kind of turns into, dare I say it, it's kind of like Mr. Miyagi and Ralph Macchio and the Karate Kid. You know, it's like wax on, wax on. It's like, you know, it's like Morpheus is kind of like Mr. Miyagi up to the point where he starts to train him, right? But with all the physical training, whether it be the training, the big martial arts scene in the dojo, or when they're leaping, when he's trying to show Neo how to leap. It never rests on Neo's. Morpheus continues to stress that this all has to do with the more proficient, the more powerful you're going to become in the Matrix has to do with how much you can detach your mind and free your mind enough and open up your self-awareness so that you can believe in yourself. So much of what Morpheus says during those training periods is that, he says to him, and there's also this emphasis on this idea that Neo, it's like, I can only in fact, he actually says verbatim, like, I can only show you the door. You've got to walk through it. And I think that is a message to us all about the idea that ultimately you need to become your own solution, or we need to become our own solution. All right? Because no one else can do no one else can save you from, the machine. It's like, it's got to start with you. And this is the message that Morpheus is telling Neo. It's like, I can only do so much. You've got to reach inside your own resources and find the keys to your own liberation. And when he does that, remember, there's this series of, and like every great hero story, it's like, usually this whole hero narrative, is punctuated by these periods of getting smacked back down, right? Getting beaten back down, or losing faith in yourself, right? And Neo will be tested, on all these different levels as he is, proceeding towards this penultimate combat with the agents, but there's all that. I wanted to just really quick show some of the other references going on here. This is a slide I pulled from someone's presentation. I plagiarized. Forgive me. I grab what I use what I can. I use what I can. And this one kind of makes a reference to the whole idea of Neo and the whole idea of the neocortex of the brain, right? Neo is Latin. It means new, the new man, the next stage of human evolution, enlightened or illuminated. And this idea of being, and the whole film kind of rests on, remember when we were talking about how Trinity and Morpheus and Neo are kind of three parts of a person that need to become integrated if we want to evolve, if we want to transcend our current condition into something higher, right? That there's this whole idea of integrating the left and right hemispheres as a kind of metaphor. The left hemisphere of the brain being that part of us that is rational, that is orderly, that is analytical, logical, and the right side of us that's more creative, imaginative, that intuitive part. One would even hazard to say that kind of feminine part of ourselves, that's more, that's less, that's more free, empathy, the irrational, right? How and I think that one of the other things going on with the Matrix is it's a cautionary tale about becoming too rational, becoming too driven by logic, by being driven too much by science and logic, and this kind of control. And this ability to be free and that we need to account for the emotions and the irrational side of us, and that's part of this integration that goes on, even with the three characters. The Nebuchadnezzar is the name of the ship that Morpheus pilots. We are introduced to the crew, including Cypher and Tank, and two people that were actually born in the machine, and the little guy Mouse, who is a kind of fun character. The Nebuchadnezzar, once again, the Nebuchadnezzar is a biblical reference about this great Babylonian king from the Old Testament that had these unsettling dreams. And the Wachowskis read a lot. They made a lot of, they were readers. They made a lot of references to a lot of things. Like here we see on top Mark 3 number 1. Mark 3 number 1 is the model number, made in the year 2086 or something like that. But for those people that dig deep, it's like Mark 3 number 11 is also can be read as the New Testament Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 3 number 11, where it says, Mark 3:11 reads, "Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, 'You are the Son of God.'" And that's a reference. And once again, we have this kind of reference to this kind of messianic, Christ-like dimension of Neo. That Neo is the salvation. That Neo is that Neo is the savior of mankind. Takes him into another training program, and Neo asks, "Is this the Matrix?" He's like, "No, this is still a training program." And he points out a couple of different things here. One is like the woman in the red dress, right? The woman in the red dress is like part of the program that is meant to. He's like, it's like Morpheus asked Neo, "Were you looking at me or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?" And it's like, Neo being a dude, like most of it's like, it's like those like, it's like those that clickbait. It's like she's clickbait, because what does she represent? She represents the distractions. She represents, not only, there are references here to the whole idea of the biblical scarlet woman, but I think it's more than just sexual. I think it's like, it's all of that, but it's just the idea of distraction in general. How we're distracted by our sensual needs, or how we're distracted by, something that is superfluous. It's like, here we are like doing our homework, and the next thing you know, it's like, you're looking at, top 10 hottest models of 2020. It's like, and we all do it. We all do it at one point or another. And it's designed to do that. The whole thing. We're going to have to start the thing when we start talking about the coercive nature of all of this technology, all of this image technology. All right, everything from advertising to those listicles to all of it. All right, it's like the woman here represents all of that, the distractions that Neo needs to overcome in order to realize who he is. But the other thing that Morpheus says here that's very chilling is that he says these every single person in the Matrix, 99.9% of the people in the Matrix are all people that are cocooned and asleep. That most people are asleep. What Morpheus is trying to say here is that most people are not only asleep, but due to the fact that they are asleep, they are all potential enemies. They are all potential enemies against their attempt at an insurrection, because they don't know any better. They're so asleep, and he says, most of these people, and why are they all potential enemies? Because the Agent Smith and the sentient programs can just manipulate them however they want. And the fact of the matter, and here's another chilling thing that Morpheus says here. He says most of these people are not ready to be set free, and they are so inured, they are so married to the system that they will fight to protect it. They're not ready. They're not ready for a system change. It's like, think about everything that's going on with the pandemic, my friends. Think about it. And think about how we're behaving. Think about the mass behavior of wanting everything to just go back to normal. And when we're honest with ourselves, there's a piece of all of us that is just like, I just want things to go back to normal, you know, and acting out and these kind of almost infantile needs to retreat into things. We want to talk about all that, you know, we'll fight. It's like instead of like the really, it's like, and that is a totally expectable response to a situation that is exceedingly stressful and stress-inducing and fear-inducing. You know, it's like, you know, it's like we'll fight to. It's like people will fight to protect it. People will fight to protect the whatever semblance they think of as the economy, up to accepting the risk of a huge sector of the population being disposable. For a lot of people, when they do this risk-benefit analysis, when they hear the projections of 400,000 dead by January 1st, and a lot of people in their minds have accepted that as an acceptable scenario in order to keep this machine that's already destroying us in place. All right? So what do I think? What do I think about the Matrix? What do I think that the Matrix is saying to us now in 2020? I think that the message of the Matrix now in 2020 is more pertinent and more prescient than it's ever been. You know, and it has more to say to us now. You know, then Neo goes to the Oracle. And the Oracle is kind of a surprise, and it's kind of a politically correct move. It's like she's, you know, the Oracle, you know. And if you watch the other, it's like it's interesting. It's like, you know, it works though. She works as this kind of wise woman of the. It's like, you know, the fact that the Oracle would be a woman and a black woman, you know, it speaks to the idea of you know, those who are unheard. You know, the wisdom of the people that are real, of the earth, that have suffered and know things, you know. But the first thing he does when he walks in, you know, this is all like part of like his like vetting process, right? And there's other candidates. There's this little girl, and then there's Spoon Boy, who has become famous, you know, Spoon Boy, who Neo interacts with, you know, and the line, like, you know, it's like, you know, you can't bend the spoon. It's impossible. You have to change your mind about, you know, things. He looks up, and there is a Latin expression up above the door, and it says, "Know thyself." It translates as "know thyself," right? Which seems to be one of the main dictums of the film, is that if we're going to overcome the system, if we're going to rise above the system, we each as individuals need to empower ourselves with education, with awareness, and with the readiness to change, right? A lot, and that change is a choice. A lot is put on the idea of this being a choice, right? So there's this disruption that goes on here because the Oracle kind of lets Neo down at this point, in the sense that she's like, well, you're not it, kid, you know. And once again, it becomes like the whole hero's journey sometimes is, you know, and it's almost as if it's planned, that he needs to go through a period of self-doubt. Somebody needs to in order for us to become who we need to be, we need to go through this period of struggling with that. There needs to be a struggle involved and an arrival to who you are, you know. And then he goes through this period. I mean, not unlike so many depictions of whether it be of all the great avatars, whether of history, whether it be Christ or Buddha or Muhammad. There's always this period of like testing, you know, that they need to be tested, you know, by either the dark forces or whatever. And here Neo is tested, you know, and he's also once again told that he is going to have to make a choice. The Oracle tells Neo he's going to have to possibly, in order to do what's necessary, have to kill somebody that's very close to him. Have to kill somebody that's very close to him. All right. Then we have the Cypher character, and the Cypher character kind of ties into the idea of like he's certainly kind of like a Judas character that starts to work for. It's like he says when he meets with the agents, he's going to give over. He's the traitor that's giving the invading army over the plans to Zion. But he represents that selfish, you know, nature of us that not only wants to go back to sleep, but will sell people out in order for it to gain power in that game. You know, think about it. You know, he represents a certain type of character. He represents a certain character type. That type of character that is willing to do unscrupulous things and sell people down the road, including his supposed friends, for some later, you know, stature in this system. We see this in other science fiction movies. You know, it's like he says, I want to be, and it plays on celebrity culture too. It's like, you know, if I give you this, it's like I want you to like make me somebody important, like a movie star or something like that. So there's this whole like riff on like celebrity culture. There's this whole riff on celebrity culture, and the final battle the final battle basically involves Neo dying. Neo dies and is resurrected by Trinity. You know, with this, and I think the Wachowskis are saying that the force of love, the force of compassion, brings him back from the dead. He needs to, and this is a big thing in like a lot of like mystical, spiritual traditions, right? Even like, you know, Christian mysticism, like one needs to die before one is reborn. So all that mythology is intact. He gets back up, and now he's arrived. Now he's like shed all of these illusions. He sees the Matrix for what it is, as a series of like, he can see through it. He's passed through all of this purgation and all these tests in order, and then it's like he like beats the shit out of Agent Smith with one hand behind his back. Because now he's overcome now he's free. And then what do the others do? You know, once they realize that, once the other agents like see that, it's like, oh shit, the game is up, right? This guy got free. They run for the hills, you know, and the bullets come flying at him, and he has no problem at that point. And remember what he says. Remember the word he uses, because it's like the most, you know, one could make a case that it's the most powerful word of the movie. He says, no. And that just, you know, represents this idea of like resistance, of saying, no, we're not going to settle. Enough is enough. No. You know, we're not going to, it's like we're not going to settle for this. We're no longer going to accept this. And I think we see the seeds of this no going on all around us. That people are just like looking at the situation and saying, no, enough is enough. We're not going to live like this anymore. And that no that idea, it's like, you know, a lot is said about being positive and staying positive and all that, but there's something to be said about seeing things and pushing back against something and just being negative and just saying, no, this is like bullshit. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to be stripped of my dignity anymore as a human being. I'm not going to be forced to do these shitty jobs anymore. I'm not going to be sitting around waiting for a stimulus check or in order to live. I am going to get up with me and everybody else, and we're going to stop this circus. We're going to stop it. And either we're going to stop it at the ballot box or we're going to stop it by other means. And that's what we're seeing here. And my last question for this lecture is simply this. I put in here as a little postscript, as a little ending of this, the most important question of the film, right? The most important question of the film is, who is the one? Who is the one, right? Who is the one? And my answer to that? You are. Each and every one of you. You're the one. You're the one that's going to be the solution to your life. You know, the solution to your drama. You know, and to be able to get educated and get resilient and demand your inalienable rights. You know, is it going to be easy? No. But it beats a lot of the alternatives. Nothing. It's like those of you people that are gym people, those of you people that go to the gym, those of you people into physical fitness, those of you people even playing games. You know, how do you get better? By busting your butt. You know, how do you get stronger? You know, nothing good happens without struggle. And this is the case with Neo. And I think this is the case that we find ourselves in. And so that's that for The Matrix. So I think that The Matrix becomes a good opening salvo and a lot of what we're going to need to talk about. Berger's going to talk about it in his own way. Henry Giroux and other people. We're gonna unpack, you know, images, how images can be used in positive and negative ways, how they can be coercive, you know. One last thing, actually I'm not done yet. So, just one last thing that I had written about this at a time that is worth quoting. It begs the question. The overall film does beg the question that I am going to pose to you as students. And it's like, do you think that our current, and this will be an essay question that you might take on, all right, for the midterm essays. Is our current situation in real life in 2020, is it better than the situation that Morpheus and Neo and Trinity find themselves in The Matrix, or is it worse? You know, and if so, how? You know, think about, okay, so the movie was released in 1999. Many technologies that we take for granted didn't exist yet or were still in their infancy. All right? 1999 was merely the beginning of Web 2.0. Before that, there was no real World Wide Web until like 98, 99. There was email, electronic bulletin boards. There was some gaming technology, but the games back then were really primitive, guys. They were still kind of really nothing compared to Fortnite and all this. Nothing like that. Cell phones, with their attendant problems, there were cell phones, but they were like these huge things. There was no social media to be spoken of. No Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram when this film was made. We didn't know them. They didn't exist. No drones yet. And reports of mass surveillance, like by the likes of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. That if you're checking the news out at all, you're seeing that they're trying to extradite him. His story is interesting. No 9/11, no Patriot Act or Homeland Security, no data mining, no NSA surveillance, facial recognition software, No fake news, no spam bots, no smartphones or apps, no selfies or selfie sticks. Nothing yet. In 1999, right? I would contend, and this is just me, I would contend that perhaps the thickness of the virtual dream, its all pervasiveness, its seductiveness as a primary means of interacting with reality is far more pernicious today and all-consuming than it is in the Matrix, alright? The primary goal of this course is going to be to examine the different facets of mass media, technologies, photography, film, and television, emphasizing their industrial and commercial nature. We will be doing a sustained analysis of how these technologies have operated in the past and how they have evolved and the ways in which these technologies have been used as means of power, control, and exploitation on the one hand. Alright, that's the bad side of it. But on the other, how these same technologies have been used to not only draw attention to that control, but often contested it. If it begs the question, if the Matrix is so powerful, so all pervasive, how does anyone get out? How does anyone know it exists? How can we even talk about it? Right? This is the hope. The fact that we know that it exists and we can make movies about it, you know. The idea that we are basically batteries, raw material, energy for the power structure is nowhere more graphically apparent than the idea of data harvesting. And I have a quote here from Chris Hedges from a talk that he gave around the time that I wrote these notes. We have to see reality for what it is. We have to see reality for what it is, and then we have to resist. Alright? So, take care of yourselves. I need to wrap this up. I hope everybody's doing well. Let's get into the Arthur Berger introduction there. And then we'll be moving on to John Berger. And we'll see you next week. Remember, next Tuesday, we're going to be meeting at noon. For those of you who can make it, we're going to be hooking back up on Collaborate at noon on Tuesday. Okay? Have a good night.